All right, and we're back. Thank you for hanging in there. So, like we just mentioned, today we have the first exciting demo of the day. This is going to be Global Data Store for Amazon ElastiCache. Joining us here is Ruchita Arora, Principal Product Manager for AWS ElastiCache, and she's going to walk us through a little bit about why this launch is so exciting, and most importantly, show us a demo of it in action. Ruchita, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Nick.
Yeah, so briefly, could you explain a little bit about what Global Data Store is and why it's so exciting?
Certainly. So Global Data Store is a new feature that we just announced within Amazon ElastiCache for Redis. And what this does is it gives you the ability to essentially have a fully managed, reliable, secure, and fast cross-region replication for Redis. So with this new feature, ElastiCache Redis customers can now write their data into one region and have that data be available for reading in two other regions. So that's sort of your classic active, passive, or primary, secondary setup, as you may, just think of, where you have one primary region and up to two secondary regions to read from.
Wonderful. And this, if I have this correctly, this launch is generally available on March 16th, so just a few weeks back. And so it launched in 11 regions globally with more to follow. But this means that anyone who can actively use ElastiCache in those 11 regions that this has launched in, they can now spin this up and get started with it themselves, right?
That's correct. Yes, we are available in 11 regions today. More to follow.
That's pretty cool. So could you tell us about some of the primary use cases for this feature?
Yeah, surely. So what we typically see is, two common asks around when we've been talking to customers around a need for global data store. Specifically, one, as we know, Redis is commonly used for extremely low latency reads. And so what, often customers are trying to do is, if you wanted to have low latency reads available globally, we're essentially using the geolocal reads in the region where you're kind of catering to your customers. So that's where Global Data Store fits in by providing low latency local reads. The second common sort of use case or benefit that customers talk about is your classic sort of a disaster recovery setup, where you want to architect globally and you want to just make sure that you have the resiliency in the unlikely event that either your primary or the region is degraded, not able to connect to. So then you can fail over to the secondary region and actually serve your reads and writes from the secondary region.
Yeah, so, better performance for global reads, having some sort of automated failover. This sounds like really powerful functionality. But prior to this launch, I'm curious, how did customers sort of try to achieve this?
Yeah, I think, really from what the customers have told us, there was no good sort of a good managed solution that would sort of give similar level of manageability and experience for the customers. Some of our customers have shared with us, they've tried setting up some sort of custom solution where they would essentially deploy in multiple regions, but then either try to do dual writes, or do some sort of chain replication between regions. But the loud feedback that we heard from customers was obviously this was very complex, and it was more in terms of sort of getting a reliable performance. The network issues that you have to work with, and getting sort of reliable, secure cross-region replication going, and ensuring the cross-region latency could be a challenge for some customers. That was one. The second thing, by sort of manually setting this up, issue that customers would often run into is just ongoing management, right? So that can often get very tedious. So even if you sort of set it up once, what happens if you want to now scale your clusters? If you're trying to scale your primary capacity, you want to make sure that you're effectively scaling your secondaries as well. Or another example is like the DR setup we talked about, where you want to promote your secondary region and make it a primary. Well, then how, you need to sort of manually reconfigure to ensure that your replication is now going out from the new primary region, and all the connectors are now sort of replicating from that. So there were sort of manageability challenges besides just the first time setup, and that's sort of the feedback we heard from customers.
Yeah, so while I know that Redis has a lot of features beyond just serving as a cache, if we dive a little bit deeper into Redis as a caching solution, I know that a lot of customers put Redis in front of a database of some sort, such as DynamoDB. Can you talk a little bit about, let's say, how Redis would compare and contrast with something like DAX for DynamoDB and other database caching solutions that we have?
Sure. So DAX, if you think about it, DAX is a custom solution that's built for DynamoDB. ElastiCache is a much broader solution, and we often see customers using ElastiCache more broadly with multiple underlying databases. You could be using this with RDS, with DocumentDB, and that's sort of the power of where ElastiCache is used. The other thing is more in terms of sort of if you just think of the use cases that Redis is serving today, right? Specifically. So while yes, Redis is a very, very popular choice for caching and primarily for low latency reads, what we often see the power of Redis really comes from two additional things. One is sort of the diverse data types that it supports, which actually enables Redis to serve a lot of beyond caching use cases. And I'll just touch upon a few examples. Redis comes with out-of-box support for sorted sets, right? So that's something that makes something like a leaderboard or any sort of ranking use case very, very simple and easy to get started with. So sorted or leaderboards tend to be a very popular use case. We often see Redis being used for chat and messaging or messaging and queuing sort of applications. Geospatial commands is another powerful support that Redis comes with, inbuilt support. So think of your classic sort of ride-hailing applications where you're trying to match a driver and a rider, and you just want to find the nearest driver. So there are a lot of inbuilt sophisticated data structures that Redis comes with that kind of really lends itself well to a lot of beyond caching use cases. And so what we see is a good way to sort of summarize this is anywhere where you need real-time analysis or real-time performance. We see Redis being used extensively, right? And this is across industries, whether it's gaming, media streaming, just a variety of ad tech, just a variety of verticals.
Yeah. Well, speaking of these real-time applications, I know that one very popular architectural style for powering real-time interactions is the pub/sub pattern. And this is one of the most common use cases for Redis. And if I understand correctly, what you're saying is with the conjunction of this feature and this data structure in Redis, really, plus the global data store solution, what we have essentially is a very easy way to get up and running with a Redis cluster that spans multiple regions that can provide a pub/sub system, is essentially a global pub/sub system on demand.
Yes, that's a good way to think of it as well, right? Because PubSub is a very popular choice. Also, just to go a little bit deeper on that, within ElastiCache, we support two configurations for Redis. One is sort of your very simple, you have one primary node or your master node and up to 5 replicas. And the other one, what we call the cluster mode, which is nothing but you're sharding and you have multiple partitions or multiple masters within a region. And you're kind of distributing or partitioning your data. So the PubSub model with Global Datastore works really well with as long as you're within the context of one shard. So a classic configuration where you just have one master works really well. Or if you're just going to try to do some sort of PubSub within a particular shard.
Awesome. So when it comes to like cross-region replication, what does the latency look like there?
Yeah. So the latency that we typically that we've seen, and we're supporting multiple commercial regions within AWS with Global Datastore, but we typically see under a second. So it's very, very quick. And a good way to think about it is if you've noticed any cross-region latency within AWS, it's very, very close to that.
Great. We actually also have a question from LinkedIn Live here that we'll be asking. From failing over to a secondary region, what does that look like for read latency from the local region? So assume one region goes down, it fails over a second region, and the initial region comes back up. Like, what does the read latency look like there?
Right. So I think there are two aspects. One is, when the failover is happening, and obviously that transition period is going to, that's just something you need to take into account for. But once you initiate the failover, it's a single click or a single API that you use to do that. And the failover typically happens within under a minute. In terms of the actual read latency for any region, uh, the only thing you want to make sure is uh, when the transition happens, the data needs to sync from the new primary. So there's going to be some initial sync that depends on your data volume and the incoming rate. But once that's done, locally you're just talking about the Redis sub-millisecond read latency.
So I know that there's a lot of solutions that we build to secure data at the database layer, but we don't often talk about how that extends to the cache layer, especially when you say that the cache layer can span a polyglot set of databases that you're using on the back. Can you talk a little bit about some of the security features, either with respect to the replication or with respect to the data at rest, and what kind of security features we have there?
Sure. I'll answer that in two parts. So by default, just outside of Global Data Store, in ElastiCache for Redis, we have support for both encryption in transit and encryption at rest. So if you're just local within a particular region, you can still enable these encryption capabilities. And this takes care of encrypting any sort of node-to-node communication or any in-transit communication, as well as if you're enabling encryption at rest, then your data, any data that goes on disk or at rest, does get encrypted. We also have support for customer managed CMKs or master keys for encryption at rest. So this is something that's available locally in each region. Now, in addition to this, when we set up a global data store and you have cross-region replication happening, by default, ElastiCache enables encryption in transit for the cross-region communication. So cross-region communication secure by default, and on top of it, customers have the choice to enable locally encryption in transit or rest.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I mean, I'd imagine a world where I can go into the console and just create one of these new global data stores, right? But what if I already have existing clusters? Can I upgrade them to leverage global data store?
Yes, we actually support setting up a global data store with a new primary cluster or an existing cluster. The only thing you want to make sure is when you are using an existing cluster, you are on the latest engine version, which is the Redis 506 version that we support today within ElastiCache. So as long as you're on the latest, you can use a new or existing cluster for setting up a global data store.
Wonderful. Well, I know I love seeing these things in action more than I like just talking or hearing about them. Is there any chance we could get a demo or see this in action?
Yeah, certainly. Let me do that. I think this is a good segue. I'll try to show the global data store with an existing cluster. Okay, perfect. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I did kind of do a video capture, but what I really want to talk about here is how do we sort of set up a global data store using an existing cluster we just talked about. And then we'll quickly go and test the cross-region replication and close off by sort of looking at some of the operations that are supported on the global data store. So with that, I'm going to actually move to the ElastiCache console. And what you see here is I'm already logged in the console, and I'm in US East 1. So that's sort of what you're seeing here. And on the screen, I'm in the list view where I can see all of my existing clusters within US East. So I'm just going to go pick one of my existing sandbox environments. As you can see, this is on 506 version, Redis 506. So that's the minimum version that I need to use. And then I'm using the R5 large nodes that are also supported with global data store. So with that, I'll select it and I'll go to actions to set up a global data store. So once I come in here, there are a couple of new fields. I have to give sort of a description and name for the global data store that will be created. Notice this is actually not the full name of the data store. The name would be auto, but I'm providing a suffix. And then I go and I pick my target region or primary region, right? Again, so I'm starting with the primary region, which will accept writes, and then I'm setting up a secondary region, which will accept reads. So I'm going to pick US West 2 here. And then I go in and give, what you see below here is just a classic cluster creation within ElastiCache. So once I've selected my region, I'm going to give a name for the secondary cluster. So sandbox copy is going to be my actual secondary cluster that gets created. Rest of the fields are pretty standard. If you're an existing ElastiCache users, this is something that you're already familiar with. I'll not go through all of these, but just call out attention to a couple of differences that you might notice. Pay attention to the engine version, the parameter group, and the node type. And these fields are auto-populated by Global Datastore to make sure that the settings on the secondary cluster exactly match the primary. So that's something you don't have to worry about. So once I go ahead create, I get redirected to the Global Store page. And as you can see, the sandbox Global Data Store that I just started creating is now showing up here. Just for the purpose of demo, it's going to take a couple of minutes. So for the purpose of demo, I'm going to use a pre-created Global Data Store to sort of through some of the other details. So I have an existing data store, which is again between the two same regions. I set it up between US East 1 and West 2. Notice my primary region is same as US East 1. So that's where I'll send my writes later. And this is available so I can kind of go through the details. So just some of basic details at the top. And then right at the bottom is actually in the regions that participate, along with the actual cluster names. So these are hyperlinks, so you can actually also redirect to view the details of those local regional clusters. And that way you can kind of navigate back and forth. And my US East 1 is the primary, where I'll send writes. And US West 2 is the secondary. So with that, let me kind of go and actually do a test, right? Let's just go and write to the primary region. So what I have here is I've sort of set up my terminal already. On the left side, I will actually, the windows on the left, I'll use to connect to the primary region. On the right, I will connect to the secondary region. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so let's do a quick connect. Connecting to US East. And I have two windows on the left. I also want to show you local replication happening within USC. So just that way you have some context. Okay, so I'm going to connect to one of the shards in US East 1. So that's going to be my primary node where I'll send my writes. And then at the bottom, I'm going to connect to the local replica in US East 1. So local replica is typically something you would use for, like a multi-AZ setup or an auto failover within the region. And then here going on the right, I'm connecting to US West. And then I'll actually get into connecting to one of the nodes in US West. What I want to make sure here is I'll actually quickly show you that both the replicas that I'm connecting to, the local replica and the remote replica, are indeed replicating from the primary node where I'll write. So let's do a info replication. They shows that it's replicating from the node, the IP that's highlighted, and then same thing on the remote region, which is my secondary region. It's again replicating from that node. Okay, with that, I can set some values on my primary region. There you go. Just a quick check locally. So I can see my current values in the primary region. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the secondary region. You see the values show up in US West. Just to do this again, right, I'm going to change the values and see how quickly it shows up. And I'll do this remotely first, so we can just do a quick get. There you go. So the values that I said, they're all showing up remotely. This is all instantaneous. For completeness, doing the same thing locally. So that's sort of, as quickly as you can, just writing into your primary region and making sure that you can read from the region. All right, so with that, let's kind of go and look at some of the operations that are supported on the global data store. I'll show you just basic operations. How do I modify? How do I scale? Now I have this global data store that works perfectly seamlessly. If I wanted to sort of scale this, so what I'm showing here is, remember we started with the R5 large node types. So if I just want to kind of scale, I can go pick a larger node type and sort of scale up. That's one way to scale. And here you notice that this impacts all the participating clusters. So if I'm scaling, all the regional clusters will actually scale so that the configuration stays the same. Another mode of scaling within ElastiCache is scaling in and out, right? So that's kind of where you would add shards or remove shards. So I won't go through all of those operations, but essentially those are all available centrally as a one-click experience within Global Data Store. So you can add shards, delete shards to scale horizontally. And again, this operation would make all the participating regions and clusters stay consistent. Lastly, I want to kind of talk about global data store or regional operations per se. So you can see I have right now just two regions participating in the global data store, one primary and one secondary. As I said earlier, with this release, we are supporting up to 2 secondary regions. So I can go and actually add one more, right? So it shows me that, hey, you already have 2 regions as a part of this global data store. I can go pick another secondary if I just want to do that. Go through it, but this screen looks exactly the same as what we started with. So just something where you can sort of come and after the fact add another secondary region. I won't do that right now. Couple other things. If you wanted to sort of remove your secondary region, you can just come in and quickly remove a secondary region as well. When you do that, it'll actually warn you to say, hey, this is your last secondary region that you'd be removing, and the status would transit to a primary only. You kind of know that there's no secondary or no secondary copy for this cluster. So finally, the most important things, right? How do you kind of promote the secondary region to primary? So if I wanted to make US West now to be my new primary region, I just go select that and promote to primary. And what's telling me is US East 1 will stop accepting writes. It'll actually get demoted to become the secondary, assuming we can actually connect to US East 1. So that's sort of, pretty much the last operation I want to talk about. This is pretty quick. It takes less than a minute to actually finish the promotion. So just kind of summarizing for you everything we went through, right? We set up a global data store using cluster and then looked at the operations. Now, you don't always have to use an existing cluster like we talked about earlier. You could just set up a new primary cluster as well. That's something we've talked about in a blog, so feel free to just actually go and look at the blog. Yeah, we will be doing more of these sessions and for the global data stores, so feel free to keep an eye and join us for more.
Awesome. Well, Ruchita, thank you so much. That was really amazing. So, sort of in conclusion here, if you are a ElastiCache for Redis user, you can try setting up global data store yourself for existing clusters, as you showed in the demo right there, where you also mentioned if you want to spin up your own new cluster, that you can very easily set global data store up there. It's its own sort of standalone entity inside of the ElastiCache suite of services and features, and you can hook this up to all the clusters that you already have running for global read replicas and failover and all the wonderful things that you just spoke about. Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was an excellent demo. I really like how simple and how simply presented all of the different features are. I mean, under the covers, there's a significant amount of complexity that's going on here, and it's just front and center in the console like that. Promote to master, add a new region,